Hi, everyone. Welcome to our newest and latest industry panel for the Sphere Festival. Was that the start? It was the start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to bringing diverse stories to life in Hollywood. We are live streaming from a variety of locations, the new normal, hopefully not for long, but welcome to the Spheres South Asian Film Festival. We are so excited to have our guests here today and this evening. I'm in New York. We have some West Coasters here as well. So without further ado, we want to jump in and make sure all of you as the audience get a lot of value and a lot of insight from our esteemed guests. I want to start with some introductions. We have Shivani Srivastav. Shivani is a Seattle-based screenwriter who examines relationships, family dynamics, immigrant experiences through the lens of comedy. She's drawn on her experience as a journalist and her family roots in the fine state of New Jersey, which is where she grew up. Her first feature film, Wedding Season, is in post-production at Netflix. Shivani, congratulations. It's amazing. And yeah, it's every writer's dream. So here we are. And she has a lot of projects in development with major production companies. She's a BA in English and journalism from NYU and an MA in South Asian Studies from the University of Washington. She's repped by Affirmative Entertainment and A3 Artists Agency. Shivani, welcome.
Thanks.
We have Roshan Sethi, writer and director. He most recently directed 7 Days. Congratulations, Roshan. That is awesome. But he is, as some of you may not know this, he's actually a physician, Harvard-trained MD, who also became a screenwriter. So look at that. That is really inspiring for a lot of us brown folk, considering we also sort of come from various traditional backgrounds and have translated some of our passions into art. He's currently working at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and he actually began writing as a student at Harvard Medical, and he's the co-creator of The Resident on Fox. Massive hit. I hope everyone's been watching. It's really great representation on that show. And he has a mini series on Sally Ride at Peacock Network USA, and wrote a feature title called Jane. Again, he directed that, and that's with Elizabeth Banks, who starred.
Didn't direct it, yeah.
Oh, did you not?
No, I just got
okay.
Yeah, no, I just wrote Call Jane, but anyways, not that it matters. But yeah.
7 Days was the one you directed.
Yes, yeah.
I stand corrected.
No,
your scripts actually appeared.
He actually is Elizabeth Banks, by the way. Just
yeah. Elizabeth Banks is in that film. That is confirmed. Okay. And 2 of your scripts actually appeared on the Blacklist in 2017, which is a feat unto its own. And lastly, but not least, we have Kabir Akhtar. So Kabir is an Emmy-winning director-editor. Your work includes Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Never Have I Ever, which I think all of us have seen religiously, Arrested Development, Unsolved Mysteries, a long-running show, 3-time Emmy nominee. That is amazing. And you actually won an Emmy for editing the pilot of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, becoming the first person of color to win in that category. So really, I mean, this panel is amazing, and I'm so excited to have all 3 of you. And I think the first sort of idea that comes to my mind is, any of you, please feel free to chime in, is what was your initial impetus to even try to venture into this industry? What was the seed? What was that spark?
Oh, sorry. I can go first if you want.
Please.
Look, I did, tons of theater in like school, like middle school and in high school and in college. But, I was a math and science kid growing up. And I started off school in engineering, which seemed like the right thing to do as a math and science kid. And very quickly realized that it was not at all for me. I'm sort of into, I say that I'm into math recreationally, like for fun, but not like professional math. That's like a whole different thing that just isn't really, it's math and I are not a good fit professionally, which left me like in college sort of unsure what to do. I ended up as a communications major, which like I had literally just been crossing things off the list of majors, but like, I have this one left. I went and took some classes. I was like, I like this. This is cool. But I had no idea what to do for work. And I'll tell you, the summer before my senior year of college, I ran into a friend at the McDonald's at home. And he was like, dude, so what are you going to do after college? And I'm like, I have no idea. And he's like, I swear this happened. He's like, you should go to film school. And I'm like, that so stupid. I'm not going to film school. I'm like a, Ivy League brat. Like, I'm not, what are you talking about? He's like, you're a communications major and you love movies and you spend all of your time in the theater. He said, you spend like, I was seriously 60, 70 hours a week in theater and like skipping class to do it. He's like, you should go to film school. And it was like that. And I was like, oh my God, you're totally right.
Wow.
Here we are.
Wow. And it's been quite a journey since, Kabir. I mean, you actually jumped into editing of all things as your initial sort of discipline, really focus. And what was the impetus for that? Like, why editing?
I went to film school and I had a professor who kind of pushed me off in a directing and editing path. I'd been a lighting designer for so long in theater. I thought, well, it's clearly going to be cinematography, but film lighting and theater lighting are very different, top down, ground up. It's like, I just sort of didn't speak that language when I started, but I took to editing very quickly. And I just sort of kept doing it. I got a job doing it like right out of grad school. And I was like, I'm going to move to LA. Watch this. Look how easy this is going to be. And then spent 3 months sleeping on the floor of a sublet, sharing a mattress with an editor friend of mine from school. And neither one of us had work for the whole summer. But it was very cute to share a blanket. Those were the days. And then he found a job and then he sort of, referred me to it. And then we both just started there. I mean, I can trace all the jobs I've had now, including recently, like, producing and directing Mindy's new HBO Max show, which will be out soon. All the connections I have and the people I know all the way back to that first job.
Wow. And Shivani, in terms of your background and history, you were coming from more of a corporate environment. You worked for large companies, Microsoft, NASDAQ, Getty Images, as a copywriter. How did you transition to screenwriting and really creative narrative work?
Well, I think like a lot of people who wind up in those fields, I always wanted to be a writer, right? And I think I had a similar like that's so stupid moment as Kabir. Like I went to NYU for my undergrad and I saw these people doing film school, but at the time I think I was scared of it and I felt like it wasn't for me. I didn't see people like me doing it, and I was like, that's so stupid. And so I went down the journalism path, which was great. And I think gave me kind of like the ear for dialogue. Like I think it laid the foundations for doing this work, but I think a lot of it was like fear. And I feel like I skirted around it for my entire career. I did like every other type of writing. I worked in book publishing. I worked in journalism. I worked in copywriting. Like, I feel like I did every other type of writing. And I was finally like, there has to be more than this, there just has to be something more. And I think it was just going through like the first 8 years of my career and being like, I need to go for it. And so I just started taking classes and I was one of those people who was like, I was the oldest person in my screenwriting classes, but I was like doing all the homework. I brought my nerd ethos to it. And I feel like I just caught up because I just got obsessed and I made up for lost time. And so I did it, while like freelance copywriting on the side. And I think I just like, it made me realize that I had the love for it,
Wow. And how did wedding season come about? Like how far along were you in your writing trial and error process in the genesis of your creative output until wedding season sort of like, came into your mind and you took it through?
It was actually the thing I first started working on in my first class. But it was romantic comedies are really hard to write. I'm sure Roshan could tell you about this too. And I realized like I wasn't going to be able, I had this idea that I was just going to write my first script and it was going to be so great and so easy. And it's just sort of like put it aside and learn the craft, like really learn the craft and then come back to it. So in a way it was, I call it my first, second, and third script because I learned on it, in so many ways. But it was 8 years since I took my class before it won this contest. And I was somebody who ended up coming through because I didn't go through like the traditional avenues. The script won a contest, and that from there it like opened all these doors. And that was 3 years ago already.
Wow. Yeah, 2018. It was in the comedy category, right, for screencraft.
Yeah. And like there's like all this debate about whether or not contests are worth it, but like literally that contest changed my life. So
right, you were able to secure a manager. You met with a producer.
I got my manager, my agent, got the script set up at Netflix, like all because of that contest.
Wow.
So.
That is incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Netflix of all studios, which is remarkable.
It feels like that never happens. Like,
yeah, so I feel like I give bad advice on panels because I'm like, you just enter a contest. That'll be great.
It's remarkable. Your debut feature film script lands at Netflix. They show interest, and it gets made with their backing.
Yeah, I still can't believe it. So
wow, that is a dream. Wow, that is amazing. And Kabir, in terms of how Shivani started out, I feel like your narrative you've been at this for, it seems like a very, very long time. You started quite early, not to age you or date.
No, it's too late. You already done
great.
It's like, you seem like the elder person here.
Yeah, we all respect your wisdom and wealth of experience, but from what I gathered, you started out as working on music and documentary series Behind the Music. You did Speechless, Alex Inc. These are shows that I think a lot of our audience may not even be familiar with. And what would you say has changed from when you first started out to where you are today in terms of representation, inclusion, a sense of how you fit in the narrative, and what have you seen from the inside out in this industry?
Well, I mean, we can all jump in on this, right? But like nobody, I moved to LA in '98, so I've been at it for 23 years, which is stunning. But also, yeah, people are like, oh, it's great, you're directing. I'm like, yeah, the dream was directing like, sort of big name, cool content. And it took 20 years to get to that point full time. So there's that, it's a long game, unless you're Shivani and you win a contest, or you're Roshan and you haven't got the same thing yet. Wow. But there's like, nobody cared. That wasn't a thing people cared about back then, like representation, inclusion, diversity. It wasn't even, they weren't concepts, right? They were like, they weren't a gleam in the industry's eye at all. For a long time. I mean, it's far back enough, generationally. So now I'll age myself too, but like, it was not an advantage to be brown at all. Do you know what I mean? It was a disadvantage, socially and culturally and professionally.
I think it's we have people like us have dual careers, right? Like, I mean, it felt scary to go all in back then, I think.
Yeah, it was really interesting that you said it was 8 years from when you wrote the script, because I was thinking, well, a lot happened in those 8 years that the industry is now receptive to it, because 8 years ago, I don't think that script would have gone anywhere because of the state of the industry.
And people told me that at the time.
My God, the advice people give is always so bad. But it's amazing. Like everyone's been saying that your first feature got made. I just cannot get over that. That's just like an incredibly hard thing to do.
There was plenty of other bad writing on the side. Don't worry.
But it really is a very impressive achievement. So.
I had a show.
I was being a physician and a screenwriter and director at the same time.
Let's talk about that.
I've been sort of saving this moment so we can all savor it. But Roshan, coming to you, you are a physician. You are coming from an industry that is considered traditional from our South Asian sort of diaspora framework, and you took a 180 and went into creative writing and screenwriting and are succeeding at it. How are you? What was the impetus for that? I know that as a teenager, you started writing epic fantasy. You apparently read Game of Thrones before it was even fashionable,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
So there's clearly some seeds there from your youth.
Yeah, I was always a really big reader and always wanted to be a writer, but also knew I had to go to medical school because I just did. My mom is a doctor, and this has been the plan since I was born. So there was really no way out of that for me. But then I ended up falling in love with medicine, and I actually became a working writer at the same time that I became a working doctor. They happened in parallel, oddly. I was a resident when The Resident was picked up to series, and was only involved in the first season, and that too virtually. But I sort of nurtured both ambitions at the same time, and have continued to practice for 12 weeks of the year.
Okay, 12 weeks in a year, and the rest of the year is focused on producing, writing.
Writing, yeah, exactly. So I try to do both. But I think honestly, the real reason I've been going in so many different directions is just because I'm gay. And when you're gay, you have this feeling of being broken and unworthy. So it drives you to these like superhuman levels of accomplishment because you're always battling that feeling. It's because I know I'm not the only one. I've encountered this in many of the stories of my friends, but it made me, I never felt like I was doing enough. And I was always trying to distract myself from the thing I didn't want to face because I only came out recently, like 3 years ago. So it kind of drove me to do crazy things. I don't know now that I'm so like settled and happy and comfortable that I have the energy to do any of what I've done. But that's it's a weird answer, but that's what it came out of, honestly.
Yeah. No, certainly it's something to really note is what that forms a part of our core and a part of our identity, and what really speaks to us from the deepest recesses of our heart, really, and how that can express itself through creativity and the work that, for example, you have done and birthed into life essentially with The Resident. Tell us a little bit about the show. You wrote this while you were in med school, I believe, or started writing.
Yeah, I had taken a year off after intern year, and I had gotten staffed on a show with a writing partner named Haley Shore, and we'd been staffed on this show called Code Black. And then we were fired from the show 13 weeks after the show had started, and then had nothing to do, but I had taken an entire year off of residency. So in that year, we wrote a feature that ended up selling, and then we also wrote, along with a third writer, Amy Holden Jones, the pilot for The Resident. So there's two other people who wrote it with me. I didn't write it alone. And then it was set up at Showtime. Then Showtime passed on what then was a very dark, subversive medical show. And I went back to residency. Then 3 months back into residency, Fox picked it up in turnaround, which is unusual for them to buy a spec in TV. That happens less often. But they did. They bought it, they redeveloped it, and then it was picked up to series. But I stayed in residency deliberately, though I had the choice to leave and be full-time on the show because
Wait. You were writing on another show before this while you were a resident also?
I had gotten a year off. So my residency had said, if you want to write on a show as a staff writer and join the guild, we get it, but you can only do that for 1 year. So I had left residency for a 1-year leave and then gotten fired 13 weeks. It was so awkward because it was like, should I go volunteer in a hospital for the rest of the year? Like, what do I do? Like, but we ended up writing our way.
It's amazing.
Were you virtual then, calling in for the show? Like, how were you?
For Code Black, I was in the room and they insisted on that. And then when The Resident got picked up, I asked to be virtual, which in 2017 was crazy. Nobody could even imagine it, a virtual writer. But I would work a full day in the hospital, then call into the writer's room. And then I just slowly lost my mind and left after a year.
Wow.
How is that even, dude? Hats off, brother. Like, I can't even imagine the part of you where it's like med school, residency, and then also like getting hired. Like, forget doing the work as a staff writer, like getting hired at all and having the time and the energy to like make that happen.
Yeah, well, I was in a frenetic era of my life, which I had not come out. But now that I have, I just feel so chill. I don't have that energy.
Right.
Yeah, you have this like fabulous chill energy. It's really
yeah, 3 years ago I would have been busting at the seams. But anyways, yeah, that's a great part of getting older in some ways.
wow.
I still have this bouncy energy. It's just the way it is.
It's
Yeah.
amazing you've kept your energy because it's hard in this industry. But
Yeah, it really is. Well, like I said, I'm off for a few days this week, which is great. I'm feeling very recharged. Man, I also got to say, it's funny what you're saying about Showtime and them like passing on your show, and then another network came along and picked it up, because that also happened to me on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. I
oh right.
cut the pilot of that show, and it was a half hour for Showtime. And I'll tell you, like, all the calls that I was on during that process, they were like, we love the script, we love the cast, we love the dailies.
Yeah.
And they did not like the cut at all. And I obviously felt very responsible, because I was editing that show. And they had a lot of thoughts about what to do to it, and we changed it around a lot to try to make it what they wanted. And it wasn't really what we wanted, and then they passed. And then 6 months later, the CW was like, hey, this thing that's they said they threw out in their trash, we like this, can you guys change this like R-rated half hour into a Monday night at 8 p.m. 1 hour, but keep it basically the same. So then we went back and recut it, did version after version to try to get a tone that was right and make it work. And the bananas part of all is that I won my Emmy for that episode, that Showtime was like, we don't want this.
Wow.
I feel like both of your shows too were sort of in the early wave of really diverse, like well-written, diverse shows where you could tell there were writers of color in the room. And I feel like they were in that first wave. So kudos to both of you for that. Because I think it opened the doors for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, I think these things did change slowly, but I cannot believe you recut a half-hour show to an hour show. Did you guys reshoot something, or how did that work?
We had when we turned it in, it was like we went back to our earlier version that we had liked, that we turned into the network, which was about 32 minutes. It was already a little bit long. We shot 2 new scenes, so the first episode is only like 39 minutes. It's a 39-minute 1 hour, and a little stretching in some places, but you can see it sort of doesn't have natural act breaks like it, other future episodes. It wasn't written with commercials in mind. So like, we'll hit commercials at certain points, but all that was part of the restructuring of like, how do we go back and like salvage what we had done? And it was like months later, and we cut it in like October of like 2014. And then it was May of 15 when that happened. And then it didn't air until September 15, and then won at the Emmys in September of 16. It was like 2 years after I'd done the work. And you talk about like how your careers like, go from here to there. I mean, a lot of that I think has to do everyone here has told the story already about it, like taking a chance. It's about taking a chance, right? Like I left a job that was, on a big hit show at the time to go do this pilot. That was not a guarantee at all. In fact, it was quite a not guarantee. Like this musical pilot, I love it, and the people are great, but I feel like, is someone going to make this show? Like, I think it'd be fun to do, but I don't know if this turns into an actual series. And then, we got to do 4 years of it.
Yeah, I think that's like a common refrain I've heard from just writers of color in general, is that the first thing that you like really believed in and tried to put out there, like every single one of them was told like, this will never get made, or we're not interested, or like faced all this rejection. And I think that it's changed, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, I still feel that in meetings I have to like fight to present diversity in a way that I feel is like authentic and real. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure it's different being a writer versus a director too, but I'm kind of curious, like after you've got past that phase. I'm sorry, I'm just this is a question I'm really curious about. Like, how has that changed for you?
Yeah, I think we would all like to know that. I mean, I'm a member of the audience as well. I'm learning just as everyone else is. So,
well, I'll say that I think that, like we were talking about earlier, like, 10 years ago, people were starting, 12 years ago, people were like talking about diversity, but not doing anything about it, and then, like we Crazy Ex, we started, like I said, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, Jesus, where did time go? But, like now people certainly are like, oh, come on in, sir. There's a lot of like, there's a lot of interest in that. I'm actually finding sort of weirdly the opposite thing, which is that I get sent a lot of projects, scripts, movies that are about brown people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, cool. Also, I'm like from Philadelphia. I grew up here in this country, like I'm finding it a bit of a, there's the system, right? Like the macro Hollywood system, there's, very much a sense of like, well, you're a writer, you're going to stay a writer. You write comedies, you're going to stay, it's like, it's hard to move from the next thing. And right now there's a thing where it's like, well, you're brown, you want to do stories about that. I'm like, yeah, but not only that, that's sort of, so Shivani, kind of like the opposite of what you were saying in a way, where there's a bit of a struggle to be like, no, I know these other things too.
Yeah.
Right. That's actually a really interesting point, Kabir, because and this is for all of you, Shivani and Roshan as well. Do you naturally gravitate to writing South Asian stories or South Asian characters, or including at least one character that's South Asian in the pantheon of your stories? Or has there ever been any time where you've written outside of the South Asian sort of construct on any degree or level?
Well, I personally began my career by writing exclusively about white people. And the 2 scripts I had on the blacklist were all white people. There wasn't even a single minority role, because that was what I was told was the only way to enter the feature writing space, which as a TV writer, I was eager to enter. And now there's this sudden interest in, and it truly is sudden. I mean, like, we're talking since Crazy Rich Asians, basically, approximately. It's like, oh, it could work, and it's ridiculous because it was a viable business and cultural model for decades, but it obviously has just suddenly seemed financially reasonable. But it wasn't until that change that I personally felt comfortable, which is horrible. But The Resident was unusual in that it had a major Indian character.
Right.
And that we were again told not to pitch an Indian lead in the room when we were pitching the show, not even writing it. And
Wow.
if we hadn't, he would never have been Indian. And his role in the show was frankly diminished from what it was in the original pilot as a result of the corporate concern of how the show would sell foreign. For example, a common refrain that we heard at Fox incredibly was that Empire was a huge show for them, but was not selling abroad because, in foreign markets, people don't want to see minorities. This is also used to justify not financing independent movies with minority leads. It's the same sort of argument. And that was part of the argument used to bring more white cast actually into The Resident. So it's like it's changed and it hasn't. I will say the gatekeepers are still by and large white, and that the interest in telling minority stories doesn't always feel like it's coming from an authentic place. But I agree that it's never been better. I just don't know how much that means.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned Crazy Rich Asians, because I had entered wedding season in contests a couple years before, and it was like nothing. The year it won, literally the month that Crazy Rich Asians was in theater.
Oh,
and I don't think that's a coincidence, because I think readers, whether it's subconscious or not, were like, oh, I could see this, and I could see a market for this. And I do think the reality of contests and selling spec scripts is people need to be like, I could see this in the theaters. So I think that significantly changed things for me. But to Kabir's point about you're always seen as one thing, it's I wrote this romantic comedy about my world in Jersey. But since then, I guess my comment about diversity was largely I just keep getting offered stuff about arranged marriage, which wedding season's not about that. But I'm so I feel I will often write because this is, I had the luxury of entering, I think, when these doors had already been open. I will always have a brown or some sort of minority lead in everything I've written. But real life, there's this array of people. But when I'm in a room pitching for something that's not my own work, I'm often feel like Roshan said, it's not always coming from a good place. And it's sort of this static, sort of old school idea of what it should be. And then feeling like I'm brought in to be the expert, but kind of still not allowed to be the expert, So that's been an interesting dynamic to navigate.
And what's interesting is these questions were never asked to Martin Scorsese has made movies about his narrow class of people for his whole life. Woody Allen has made, it's the same 5 types of people at his dinner parties have, been the substance of his movies. But somehow if you make movies or shows about Indian people, it's so niche, it's so narrow. When the truth is almost all filmmakers have made movies about the things they know.
But plus there's the also like the ongoing floating thing in the air about the word Asian and what that means. I mean, like Asia is a continent with like 4 billion people.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like what you were saying earlier, like I was recently elected as the co-chair of the Asian American Committee at the Directors Guild. And I've been going to the committee meetings for like 11 years. Like I'm pretty active over there. I try to like help out with the community. But when I first started going, I was like, is this for me? Do I belong here? Just to think about like, that's only 2010-ish to be like, I'm like, do I count as Asian American, And then Crazy Rich Asians comes out and everyone's like, you're not Asian. I'm like, okay, we have to have a conversation about what the word means. There's a lot of countries in Asia, like, I don't know, Russia, like it's very, completely what Shivani was saying too. It's like, there's definitely like, oh yeah, you fit in these boxes, we can see that, there's the aphorism about how in Hollywood, all these studio people, they all want to be the second person to do something, Nobody wants to be the first, but people are dying to be the second. Oh, just like this other movie that was huge. Can you do that? Because like someone else did it first, and now we know.
Yeah.
Right. Someone broke new ground, redefined some sort of a narrative, especially around identity, and then it sort of opened the floodgates, and they want that replicated. I'm presuming for commercial purposes, really, because it was a success.
Right.
So
it's like when Ants and the Bug's Life came out at the same time. You're like, okay, I see what's happening.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's interesting, Shivani, you mentioned something about how sometimes you feel like it's not coming from a good place when you're pitching. Whatever that idea may be, it may feel inauthentic. And I wanted to get a sense from you and Roshan as well, as a writer, both of you, is how much creative control or say did you have in shaping the final product or shaping the discussions from what you wrote and created and really owned in many ways?
Yeah, I think with Wedding Season, I got really lucky with the producer and the director. I know first-time writers are sometimes kicked off their own scripts, but I think because it was an original script, and the director was not South Asian, I think it was sort of, I was also the cultural consultant in a way, right? And so I think it ended up serving me well because they needed me. I mean, we were a great team. I felt like I had a very unusually positive experience as a first-time writer. And I was involved in edits. Everything was on the up and up, and people ran things by me. I was getting calls while they were shooting about how to fix things. And I know that that's often not the case. And like people have such horrible experiences, they leave the industry. But from that, like and now that I've gone on to sell other projects, I've realized there's a huge difference between selling your own work versus pitching for something that belongs to like a studio or another production company, and they own it and they've got their vision for it. And I think when it comes to South Asian characters, I think I am finding I prefer to pitch my own work because I want to have that control over the representation in the story, which I realize is idealistic, but so far it's been working, so I'm gonna keep doing it.
Yeah, like your whole thing so far has just been like, oh, I won this contest, I had to make this movie for Netflix. Everybody involved me the whole time. I'm like, what? Nice work. For everybody watching at home, it's like, yeah, this never happens, but like, try.
I swear there was a lot of bad writing in between, really.
Plenty that we don't see as part of the creative process, right? And Roshan, would you say, how has your experience been in that respect?
I would say that I've come to a similar realization as Shivani, but I think it's taken me a longer time. But it is really hard to, the majority of writing jobs come from other studios that have open writing assignments in the feature space, or producers who have an idea and then want someone to enact their idea. And it has been by and large a disappointing process for me every single time to pitch on assignments. They often don't get made too, even if you do successfully secure one and write a good draft. So I think going the route of like just believing in your own original ideas is definitely the ballsiest and best move. I don't know if Yeah, I don't know. A lot of what is being developed isn't made, obviously, but the original ideas that kind of fight to see their own light of day, they have a much better shot, I think. But I've had a similar experiences, in other words. Um, like I said, the gatekeepers are still by and large white. And even though some of the junior executives and the talent and all of that is changing, I don't think the gatekeepers are changing quite as much as people think they are.
Now we still got a few years of like, trickling up. It's the thing we talk about a lot in like, diversity in the industry. There's a lot of focus and emphasis, right, on like getting people from 0 to 1, but
Mhm,
not as much on getting people from like 1 to 5 or 5 to 10.
mhm.
This is the thing we try to do. It's like various committees and mentorship programs I'm part of, where we're like talking about, okay, but this is great, but if this is all that's sanctioned by the people up here, then it's sort of a token handout. That's not what, that's not the end game, right? It's like good for people to get in for sure, but then it's about like we have to keep pushing people along and get
Sure.
those people out of the way.
Yeah, totally.
No, absolutely on point, Kabir. And in terms of this push for greater representation, right, in the halls of power, so to speak, what do you envision needs to happen? Is it truly that we keep telling authentic stories about who we are or what speaks to us as writers, as directors, as actors? Is that really the key to unlocking sort of the gates to this industry? Is it some other set of skills that is needed? What would you say to aspiring or up and coming creatives who want to break in?
Poison the people in front of you.
Clearly.
Yeah.
I think it's a volume thing. Like, when I look at, like, I feel like that thing happens with probably the work that each of us have done, where I think the community feels so strongly about it because there aren't that many things to latch onto. And sometimes it's like, well, how come it didn't represent this, or how come it didn't represent that? And it's like, well, we just need more. Like, I'm not like a romantic comedy. It's not going to do everything. So it's a great movie, but like, and I think, all of these shows, I mean, it's like, we just need the breadth. We need the dramas. Like, we need the people who are on the production side, on the writing side, on the exec side. Like, I think we just need the volume of people to tell this array of stories.
Yeah. And I think we need the buy-in of people in power. I mean, for example, the Duplass brothers, Mark and Jay, are constantly financing and producing movies by first-time directors who are by and large women or people of color, or women who are people of color. And they have done that for years before it was even a craze. And through this little weird mini industry of, ultra low budget movies that they make, some of which are very good, some of which are not, they have created directors, a whole new class of directors. And they did that with their show Room 104, which was like a little factory for episodic directing. And they use the name that they have in the industry, and they have the power and the clout that they have in the industry. And they've they've used their function as gatekeepers to create opportunities. So I feel like the more people who are doing that, the better too.
Yeah, it's definitely it's about numbers, right? One interesting thing about when Never Have I Ever came out, like I directed 2 episodes in the middle of the first season, and it touched so many people. I'm so excited to be a part of it, and like, we definitely got feedback. I definitely got feedback from people that was like, well, that's not my story. It's not really representative of me. And I'm like, all right, well, yeah, there's a billion people in India. Like, we're not going to touch everyone's life story with one show. But the point is not to do that. The point is to be like, here's a show. No one says this about like, this cop show set in Chicago. Like, well, that's not my story. And I'm a cop from like, Salt Lake City. I'm like, sure, right. You're right. It's not. But like, it's not meant to be. And it was interesting to see how much pressure there was on this show to be good. It's, it's that Obama thing, right? First Black president. It was like, okay, you talk about like 9 more Black presidents down the line, it's not going to be that big a deal anymore, But like, he talked about having to like, uphold a certain standard of like in a difficult way. So, I think it's a numbers game. I think as you start to see more and more of it, and it's cool to see that like, as there's a first one, then suddenly there start to be more. I mean, in the first decade of the 2000s, there was a brown person on every comedy, which was amazing, you know. And now there's like, it's starting to be more people doing their own thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A really valid point. I can understand how there could be so much pressure on us to really try to speak for a variety of people, even though a specific script or show may not do that, considering how diverse South Asians are, right, from the subcontinent, and the plethora of identities and faith backgrounds and cultures. That is a tall order. Shivani, did you feel, or have you felt that pressure at all? I think wedding season came from an authentic place. It seems a slice of life, perhaps from your life and story and in Jersey. Was there any pressure to reshape that by any outside forces, or later on in other works that you've written, has there been any sort of pressure?
I think we like seeing some of the feedback around like Never Have I Ever. I think we put the pressure on ourselves, you know, to make sure that we felt that we felt like we could stand by the work that we put out. And I think that's like all you can do at the end of the day. But, you know, we wanted to make sure that people didn't feel like we were laughing at the aunties or laughing, like, you know, I think it pushed us to be extra careful in a good way. And I think the pressure came internally. I think we got great feedback from the actors. Like, I think it really was like everybody involved in the project came together as a community, and we put the pressure on ourselves, but in a good way, to feel like we're proud of it and we can stand by it. And it isn't, you know, it represents this one specific experience, but I think we felt like the pressure was a good thing. I think sometimes though, it's, I mean, of course it can be a bad thing too, because I think sometimes I'll get scared to broach certain topics, right? Because you're like, ooh, that one's gonna get people mad, but maybe that's a good thing, right? I think we're like still in that infancy where it's like, you know, I mean, I want to say playing it safe, but I like, there's like a zillion directions that you could go with this, like, you know, with just, if you just want to tap into South Asian history, mythology, I mean, it's boundless, but I think there's still some fear, for me at least, in terms of pressure.
Yeah. Roshan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this specific topic, for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really hard to make art defensively and to think of all the possible criticisms you might have to encounter. And on the other hand, you want to be respectful of all of the opinions and the fact that we've only been recently empowered to tell these stories. So it's really hard. Fortunately, I don't think anything I've made has come that close to, honestly, like our movie 7 Days makes a lot of fun of aunties, and we never even thought about
I mean, that's what they're there for.
thought about that.
Yeah.
In a loving way. Wedding season does that, with love. With love.
But with love, yeah. I don't know if you've seen India Sweets and Spices too, which premiered at Tribeca as well. It's coming out in November from Bleecker Street, but it also makes a lot of fun of aunties in like a very loving, sweet way.
Yes.
It's a great genre. But
the auntie comedy.
The auntie comedy, exactly.
Huge.
Yeah, I think it's like it's gonna become just like just like Martin Scorsese movies. They'll just be auntie comedies.
Yeah.
There you go. Absolutely. Actually,
I'm looking forward to the half-hour multicam, just aunties. You know, and just a bunch of like fussing aunties trying to like, you know, get through their life.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, I'll have to contact you offline about the
Golden Girls version. I would
definitely
watch that.
Yeah, that's a good idea, doing a Golden Girls
You
version.
can go do it. I mean, you know, I'm free in January.
Yeah.
that would be pretty amazing. Yeah, to have a show for aunties, about aunties. That would be extraordinary.
Well, that's, you know, it's funny because like I was surprised when I worked on Never Have I Ever, the first season. The show wasn't out, and I remember I was very proud of the work we had done. I had a lot of fun doing it. I love doing it. But I was like, well, you know, it's a high school show, so I feel like a lot of people in high school and middle school will watch it. I don't really know. You know, I had like no idea. You know, you don't know. Like I've worked on shows, I'm like, oh, this is a big hit, and then it's like canceled. Nobody watched it, and you know, this was like #1 on Netflix.
Yeah,
in every country. And then it just happened again with season 2, and we're shooting season 3, starting in a couple months. Like, you just don't know. I mean, like, my parents were into it, older people, younger people, like, cool. And I think I don't know. I think it's a good show. It's like fun, and it's
so good. I
Yeah.
love it. I've seen every episode. And
Yeah, I'm obsessed with it.
I love Maitreya. I hope I'm probably mispronouncing her name. She's so good. Out of nowhere, this talent.
Yeah.
So
yeah, she's fantastic.
someone that young who's now going to have, I hope, a long and fruitful career in the industry, who's been birthed by a show like this that is so
Yeah.
prominent. Because when you look at the stars who are in their 20s right now, it's a very white crowd despite everything. And I just feel so excited that this show exists and created her, along with everybody else who's amazing.
Yeah.
Portna and everybody's amazing.
And she's super. I mean, also Maitre is like weirdly, like very down to earth. She's just super cool. When we met, it was just like, oh yeah, I see you. It's like, dope. It's just that she's the whole cast of the show. Everyone's so good and so smart and chill. And you know what? Like the key, honestly, right, is they're all excited about it. Like, I mean, obviously it's a big, exciting opportunity. But you like look at, I mean, I've worked on shows where cast members are sort of like, not that excited about it. Like, they show up to work and they say their lines and they're ready to go home as fast as they can. And I think it shows. It shows, the lack of sort of excitement and passion shows in a finished product that doesn't sort of resonate and ring in a way that you want it to.
Yeah, on point, Kabir. I mean, I've been on set as an actor where there's deep apathy among the lead cast. And that definitely translates on screen, and sort of the vibe and the tone of the show. It's really not, doesn't feel rejuvenating in any way. Whereas Never Have I Ever, I think I could speak for a lot of people. It was like joltingly refreshing, right? It was just very, very sort of from the get-go, the first minute in, when she's doing a puja, right? I believe that was the opening scene of the first episode of season 1. And we were all just intrigued. It's like, what is this show going to be really? And how does it convey identity? And even if it's a high school setting, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
definitely, I would say Never Have I Ever was a watershed moment in terms of South Asian content, and really for Netflix to take a chance on it, and I believe partner with Mindy Kaling to bring it to life is remarkable.
Well, one of my watermarks as a freelance for my whole career, one of my watermarks is always like, how jealous would I be if somebody else did this?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, when I read about that show in the trades, I called my agents. I was like, we have to connect to this. We have to.
Yeah.
Like, we straight up have to. If it doesn't happen, I'm moving home. Like, it'll be too sad if it didn't. And I'm very, very thrilled to be part of the family over there. And I'm excited to get going back. We just figured out dates a couple days ago for when we're starting again. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Actually, it's interesting, Kabir, because you have directed a couple of episodes. Roshan, you just directed a film as well, and you were a writer. Now you just directed. You've broken into that world. Kabir, you were an editor. Now you're a director. You've broken into that. You've been a director from what I've read. And Shivani, I mean, if I'm presuming at some point, we'd love to see you direct some of the works that you're doing.
Nora Ephron someday.
Yeah, definitely. That would be.
Yeah. You just have to enter another contest, and then there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the directing contest?
So my question is, was it how did you tackle directing from your respective areas of expertise, right? Editing, does the editor mindset, did it play a role in how you directed your work? And Roshan, as a writer, how did that translate into your direction and really your philosophy as a director? I'd love to know that link.
Who's going first?
You go first. Yeah.
Shoot.
I've said this before, but I say it a lot. When I was editing, I used to say editing is the most important part of the process. But now that I'm directing, I feel that editing is the most important part of the process. I mean, we don't go to movies to read a script, and we don't go there to watch raw dailies. We go to watch a finished cut. And I have a lot of friends who direct who did not edit, and I don't understand how they do it at all. It makes no sense to me. What matters is getting pieces that we can put together eventually in a way that is emotionally satisfying, technically proficient, and like creatively engaging. And that is like, on set, like I'm just, for many years when I was editing and like, be watching dailies, right? Like this, and constantly, it was a great training. It was a great many years of an additional sort of film school, world to work for some great directors and see how they would do it, be able to take it apart and work on it, and to work with some terrible directors who were like, oh my God, why is this like this? And I used to dream of like reaching through the screen and like fixing the way shots were. And being on set now is just like doing that, except I actually can. We're just watching monitors. I'm like, wait, we can fix this. You just reach through the screen, walk over there and change it and come back and try again. Pace and velocity of scenes and sort of like, rhythm and like mood and like so many things like that are constantly going on in my head. I have successful director friends who do this without an editing background, and it makes no sense to me because that's how I do it.
Got it. Interesting. It's interesting how you see the editing process or your experience as an editor as so instrumental to who you are as a director. That's fascinating.
It's because editing is the most, I'll say it again, it's the most important part of the whole storytelling process, because you can absolutely destroy a great movie with bad editing.
Yep.
And you can turn a show into a very mediocre show with average editing. There's a lot of like snap and like crackle and pop, I guess, to like the way these things go together and can be put together. Pacing, enhancement of performances, enhancement of like camera work, enhancement of sound, enhancement of like writing, and like adjustments to whole like taking scenes and moving them around and taking jokes and putting them in the right place. Like it just starts to become, a joyful puzzle of like it's like playing music. You don't want to like be like, okay, if you're focusing on what note you have to play, you're sort of not in it. You want to cut to like do this a little bit and kind of like be loose. I could talk about this for hours. I'm sorry.
Your passion definitely comes through, which is awesome. And Roshan, what about you? Do you, as a writer first, how did that play a role, or did it at all influence your directorial debut?
Well, yeah, I just want to be really clear. The movie I directed was shot in 8 days. It's just two people in a room talking, so it is not anywhere on the scale of the more complicated stuff. But for what we did when we were shooting like 15, 20 pages a day, it was a bananas experience that I don't think a normal. It was made for $150,000. Like it's a different kind of movie. But it was very useful to be a writer, I would say, especially shooting out of sequence and understanding the emotional energy coming in and out and what the right narrative beats to hit were. It felt a lot like writing, and it felt a lot like medicine, which is an odd thing to say, but it didn't feel too different from what I had been doing. I guess I probably feel this as a writer. I still feel that writing is the most important part. But of course, we all feel that of where we come from, but only because there's literally, it's the hardest stage in that you go from literally nothing to something. And like that, at every other stage, you are building it and creating it and finessing it. And for sure, like very important things are happening. But like when you've stared at that blank page and then made it into a script, it's like, nothing feels like that still to me. But again, my experience directing is so limited that I don't even really feel I'm qualified to answer that question. I've directed for 8 days. So, but that's what I feel.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. We actually have a couple of questions actually from one person, Anjali Yadav. I don't know, Shivani, if you know Anjali, but she's also from the University of Washington South Asian Studies program. Nice. So she's mentioning that, and she has 2 questions. One is for you, Shivani. Did you ever think of academic writing in the history of your life? And actually, let's ask that, and then I'll ask the other.
There was a point where I was like, I didn't know, like where I didn't know what to do next. And I was like, I'm going to get my PhD. Like that was so easy. Like I seem to set my sights on these like bizarrely difficult things, but I did not go for it. And even after my master's, I realized that I wanted to pursue like writing for a general audience in some way. Still hadn't realized it was film yet, but.
Got it. Got it. And her follow-up question is, I think for the entire panel, is how important is it to be authentic? How is it to be authentic, to be a writer? Okay, I'll rephrase. How important is authenticity, right? In order to be a writer, how do you bring authenticity in your writing? That's the question. Yeah. What do you think?
Go on.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like this is probably true, like Kabir, for your work too, and Roshan, for your work. I think it's only good if it's authentic. So, because you can try and write, and that's where I think my original work ends up being just better, because it's coming from like writing what I know and writing from something that feels urgent to me or that I've been thinking about or that's been bugging me, or fascinating me. And so I think the authenticity, doesn't have to come from necessarily writing about South Asian characters or character of a specific background. I think like people always talk about the emotional truth, but it's like, I've been working on this holiday script and it's like, my husband's family is from Taiwan. And it was like remembering this time when we had like a baby and our parents were just kind of getting to know each other. And our first holiday, it was like kind of like a disaster. And just like remembering how difficult that time was and like turning that into a comedy. So I think the authenticity, it's like that, like thinking of like an emotional truth where you're like, that was like awful, or that was amazing. And then translating that into something that will entertain people. And I think that's like what all good writing, all good TV and film is.
Well said. Kabir?
Who, me?
Yes.
I think, I don't know. I guess one exercise that you could commit to try to understand what it means to be authentic is to try for a minute to be inauthentic and, like figure out what that means, and sometimes you sniff when you're watching a movie or a show, when something is false, you can sniff it in it. Like you sometimes are watching a movie or a show and you have a sort of amorphous sense that you don't like it, or that it's not good. And, it's made from many different pieces. It can be writing trouble, it could be acting trouble, it could be all kinds of things. Very often it's editing trouble and people don't realize that. But, I don't know. We were talking about how in an episode of Never Have I Ever that I directed, I had a dinner scene where, one thing that happens when you're directing and you're on set is you spend a lot of time in prep trying to anticipate all the things that can happen and be ready to handle things as they come, as the day is rolling by, as the time is running out, as the money is getting spent. And people on set all day are pitching ideas and have questions. And, part of the job is to answer them and to pick a lane and just commit to it. And we're shooting this dinner scene and, the food people who were in charge of that had set up like dosas for dinner. Okay. And, cool, fine. And the people who are doing the set decorating, like, had put forks and knives on the table. And it's like, sure, cool, fine. But you have to sort of intercede at some point and be like, well, I don't think this family is going to, fork and knife their way through these dosas. I think they're just going to, eat it by hand. So, Cass was like, I think we'd be eating this by hand. I'm like, it's split second decision, and it doesn't come from any thought process. Really, it's like, yeah, let's get these forks and knives out of here, and it's like, it's not anyone's fault. Like everyone's trying to do their best and commit to pitching ideas. They're like, well, I'm like, right, we're just going to do this, because it's not like in the script, like, well, they eat with their hands. It's like these small moments of reality, like constructing a reality, which is what you're doing on set as a filmmaker, is just to be like, we're just going to do this, otherwise I think sometimes what that scene would have looked like,
Yeah.
Would have been very strange.
Yeah. And it would have seemed inauthentic. So it was a good catch. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like, just as there is a male gaze in cinema, there's also a white gaze, and it is easy to fall into the trap of making entertainment for them. We are bringing our culture to them. What will they make of our world? And if it's hard to do this, and I fall into this trap all the time and often don't succeed, but recentering it so that you're actually making it for the aunties, speaking of the aunties, it changes the way you write and it changes the way that you create, because you're less afraid, frankly, and you are more authentic as well as a consequence. But it's a hard thing to do.
Definitely. And I think it reminds me of what you said, Roshan, about Martin Scorsese and Woody Allen, that they just wrote from their worlds or their subculture, call it what you may,
And
especially.
they weren't concerned at all with making their worlds accessible. Like Woody Allen wasn't like, how do I make my world accessible to everyone else? Martin Scorsese with his mafiosos and his gangsters, amazing director, like he wasn't ever at all worried about that. If anything, he leaned into the authenticity, the way these people spoke, the texture of their languages and their food and their looks. He never was like, but we don't want to alienate anyone. And nobody ever said that to him in all likelihood. Although the way Italians were viewed in the 70s was different, but still. Yeah.
So that really leads me to the question of why didn't the establishment, why didn't the gatekeepers in this industry receive us in a similar manner as they did Martin Scorsese back in the day and still do? What is it about?
I mean, I think we know the answer to this question.
Yeah, it's just but I also think, it's what constitutes minoritized has changed so frequently over the years. And I was on the verge of saying this before, but Italian Americans were minoritized to some extent in the 70s. And The Godfather, for example, was viewed with a lot of skepticism and distrust by the Italian American community, which thought they would be impugned by the movie and before that by the book. So it's hard to remember and have all the right historical context. I'm sure Indians were doing worse than Italian Americans in the 70s. I'm pretty sure that, but in terms of representation, how they were treated in the country. But now I do think that it's just it honestly comes from a financial concern that these stories are interesting only to a very few people who occupy the same identity, and that anyone else will be turned off by how ethnic and specific it is. That fear is still there. You can still, like, it's encouraging everyone to lean into diversity, but don't get carried away is sort of the subtext underneath a lot of the meetings I've had, personally. But.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that, watching TV in the 80s, right? I mean, or movies, where were all the brown people, right? Brown people were punchlines, right? And had funny accents. That were, otherish and foreign, right? And then it was like, nutty next door neighbors, one line punchline characters. And then it was, brown people were terrorists on TV and in movies, for another 10 years, right? Like,
yeah,
it's a sea change. I mean, the fact that it's exponentiating slowly as like more and more of us make our way into the industry. We're sort of still here on this part of the curve, but you can feel this coming if we can keep this up, because people are interested in stuff like that. People are interested in seeing stories. I mean, audiences, like the people that make the decisions about these things are, like you're saying, Roshan, they're still like, yeah, we want that, we don't want too much of it. Like, let's have the appropriate amount of that, and let's make sure we have these nice, safe shows too.
Yeah. I think too, it was like when I started work on Wedding Season, people just told me like, there are no stars to star in this movie.
Yes.
And that I got as a writer, I heard that a lot. And I remember hearing an interview with Kumail Nanjiani where he said that Judd Apatow told him like, this is a great script, this for The Big Sick, like, this is incredible. Now you just need to get famous enough for me to make it. And he did with Silicon Valley and like his other work. But I think that was part of it too. I think they literally couldn't picture the faces who would play these roles. And so much kudos to, we don't have any actors on this panel, but like so much kudos to those people. Cause I think that is a whole other level of like courage and bravery and putting yourself out there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, and it's so funny that they say there are no stars because they'll routinely place new, inexperienced white actors in the leads of major studio franchises where the IP brings them. So it's like, it's all false. And also, Shezi, I'm curious because you are an actor, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Of
I
course,
am.
he's an
how many
actor.
times, I mean, until recently, how many times, for the question I always ask brown actors, which is a little out there, but how many times have you auditioned to play a terrorist? Because it's so telling. Every time the number is so high.
Countless. I don't. It's remarkable. My first role, and I'm embarrassed to say that it was a terrorist role. It got me my
Yeah, I
SAG
don't think you should
card.
be embarrassed, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Because we're all trying to make it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
I wrote
those
it for
were-
all white people. I mean, like, yeah.
Yeah, those were the only roles I was getting. That's
Oh,
it. Auditioning and crazy Middle Eastern accent of some variety, generic variety, which sounded ridiculous in my opinion, in hindsight in particular, right? You try to bring authenticity to the craft as an actor, you take it seriously, but what they're asking for is absurd, in my opinion. And I played quite a few these one note,
right.
simpleton terrorist guys because I'm brown or I have heavy set, deep set eyes or whatever kind of clicked
Yeah.
for the casting director. And
All
boom.
that was available until
Yeah.
very recently. It was only very recently that brown people were allowed to play actual humans, and until
Right.
recently it was typed. So it is like, it's just it's crazy how recently all of that has occurred.
Yeah. When did it shift for you, Shezi? Actually, like, I mean, it's
Yeah, I would say it started shifting in I'd say 2018.
interesting. Crazy
Yeah,
rich Asian
easier
here.
days than
Yeah.
now.
And I was in LA that year and I have a manager out there. And then I started getting auditions for Evan and Tom and
Yes,
right,
Wow.
absolutely.
right. Just a variety, like series regular, series leads for new pilots, right?
Yeah.
And there's still the thing about, I mean, we can talk about this all day too, but there's still the thing about like, us having ethnic names and how that affects your success level. I mean, there's like the famous study, right, where they had like, took the same resume, put a white sounding name and a black sounding name, and the white sounding name kept getting calls for interviews more. And like see this now, it's really interesting. Like, through no fault of their own, have friends who are ethnic but have like sort of anglicized first names.
Right.
And do they stick out a bit more in like very, very, unconscious bias kind of way where people are like, oh, neat, they just feel a little more approachable or less difficult to deal with or whatever that is,
Yeah, that's so true, Kabir. I mean, there was a time where I was going through an existential crisis as an actor, and I was wondering if I should change my name or anglicize it, right? And maybe like Shezi Penn or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something that Shez Penn. I don't know. Something that would like.
I think
You
that
know,
last
It's got some snap to it,
Yeah, right. And then at some point, I was like, you know what? You have Mahershala Ali. You have all these incredible actors. You have they are proud of who they are and what their names are, and they don't hide their identities. So I kind of I shifted my gears there in that sense. And
oh yeah, it's I've certainly worked with people who have like anglicized their names a lot. They've taken, I don't have an example off the top of my head, but like it's taken a long, South Asian name like one of us here has, and like just made it like a 3-letter version to like make it easier for everybody. I'm like, it's not that difficult. Elizabeth is a 4-syllable 9-letter name.
totally.
And everybody can say it.
So true.
Absolutely. No, all great stuff, folks. This has been incredible so far. I know it's 3:10 Pacific, 6:10 Eastern. I think we can probably wrap up. Maybe a final question from me. We don't have any other questions from our viewers, but what would be your advice to everyone watching, in particular, fellow South Asians who are looking to break into this industry?
Anglicize your name.
And that is it, guys. Thank you all so much for coming. Take care.
And win a contest.
Yeah.
But no, my advice would be that it is really heartening that there are enough of us to comprise a panel. And I know you guys have had other panels as well, but there really has never been more opportunity and interest in Indian stories. So I hope the overall message is actually an encouraging one, because even though it was much more difficult, it's getting better every day. So.
I think that the storytelling, what I'm finding and what I'm, hoping for that we start to see starting now-ish is that it's not just about stories about people from a place, and it's becoming less and less about the fact of someone being Indian American, the fact, and just rather who they are. Because the thing I think is the most interesting, sometimes just even in my day-to-day life, is very subtle, I'm from Philadelphia, man, but I talk about subtle cultural differences. Like at our house growing up, there were always house guests. There were always people coming and staying, and people just come and stay. So here at the house, whenever I've had a friend who's needed a place to stay, broke up with somebody or moved to town briefly, I'm always just we're just here's the key, just come stay for a while. You know what I mean? I'm not offering that to everybody in the audience, but I'm saying that it's just stuff like that. As you start to see it on TV and start to see it in movies, you start to be like, oh, that's a cool thing. That you just, is it cultural? Is it ethnic? Not really. It's just a lifestyle choice. It's not a thing you see all the time. And I think that sort of stuff, hopefully we see it more. So people are not like, what, really? You do that? And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. And I agree with all of that. And I think it's just, not getting frustrated, because I think I felt so behind when I started, and I had friends who were not South Asian in the industry who'd been at it so much longer. And I think there are, I've noticed there are these mentorship programs and labs from South Asians in the industry where they're there's 1497, Islam, they're running these labs specifically to bring up South Asian talent. And I think to close this gap, there isn't really, people call it a talent gap. I'm the talent is there. It's not a talent gap.
Mhm.
It's an opportunity gap. And so I think it's, don't be frustrated that you're not there with the craft yet. It's just a question of putting in the time. And there will be people who want to help lift you up, and just trust in that.
Yeah. And thank you, Shezi, for moderating this.
I know.
And bringing your perspective as an actor too, and to the Sphere for hosting this.
No, thank you all. It's been so lovely to actually have this chat with all three of you. So thank you all for making the time to share your insight and experiences with the audience. And thank you to the audience for showing up and hanging out with us from your schedules. And thank you to the Sphere for this wonderful panel. So I want to thank all of you for hanging out and sharing your wisdom. And if there are no other questions, I don't think there are. I think we probably covered so much in this chat that people are left speechless.
Hopefully next time around, this is great, you guys. Hopefully in person. I feel normally we'd be let's go across the street and get a sandwich or something. But
I know. It was nice to meet all of you too.
Yeah.
To work together at some point.
Absolutely.
I will audition and not for a terrorist role. So there we go.
I was just gonna say, we could write a great terrorist part for you. You've already done it, so
I listen. I can do it in my sleep.
Yeah, you got the accent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, we don't know if it's over yet.
On that note,
yeah.
wow.
It's